The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, we're just going to wait a minute for other attendees to log on to the webinar, so we'll be with you in just a moment. Okay, so let's get going then. So my name is Steve Renshaw. I'm the managing partner at Ratio. We are an optimization, development and technical consultancy agency with offices in 3 European countries, working with global brands on all aspects of digital customer experience. And what I'm going to be talking about today is machine learning, which is a topic that seems to be talked about a fair bit without anyone ever really seeming to know what it is or where to get started. So what I'm going to be doing today is to take you through a bit of a whistle-stop tour of machine learning, so looking at what it is, the problems it solves, a quick example of how this could apply to your own world within digital marketing, and the steps, tasks and the skills you're going to need in order to deliver your first machine learning project. So if you're sitting comfortably, then we'll begin. So very quickly, I'm going to just spend about 5 minutes talking about what machine learning actually is, because it's a phrase that's tossed around a fair bit, and it's interlinked often with conversations such as artificial intelligence and chatbots and cognitive services and a whole bunch of other things. So machine learning, as I best describe it, is best considered as a subset of the artificial intelligence world. And in the context of what we're talking about today and the digital marketing world, it's really about learning how successful outcomes are achieved in your digital channels. So what I mean by that is, what are users doing successfully? How can we learn from that? And then how can we take other users through a similar successful journey? This will make a bit more sense as we go through the presentation in terms of the challenges that this is trying to solve for you as a digital marketer. I think most of the people on the webinar today are from professional services organizations, so you're probably going to see the examples I give are going to probably ring true to the situations that you find yourselves in. But for starters though, let's use an analogy, because everyone loves an analogy. I like to think of machine learning as a bit like a child playing with those little bricks you had as a child. You had to try and fit into holes of different shapes. As you can see on the screen, there's our child's toy, there's the bricks, and there's our square cube with the holes that they've got to get the bricks into. And what you're essentially doing when you're rearing your child is you're chucking the bricks at them, you're telling him how to work out which brick goes into which hole, and then you keep chucking bricks at him until he's used enough bricks to fill the holes, and he can tell you which brick goes into which hole. And machine learning is really the same concept. You're taking a newborn baby's brain with nothing in it, and it can't actually do anything until we start telling it what it is we want it to do, and then feed it with the information, or the bricks in this case, with which to do it, with which to achieve the objective, which in this case is getting the bricks into the holes. What machine learning isn't is some magic ball that we can chuck our data at and expect it to come back and tell us our fortune. Machine learning is all about the data that we give it so it can learn and then achieve the outcome that we want it to achieve. So this is why I like the analogy with a baby, because it's the same sort of concept. You've got a blank canvas, you're telling it what to do and what it can achieve. If we try and break it down a little bit further, if we have a look here, you're feeding information and a task into a process, essentially. So in the example that the parent's giving the child the toys and telling him the objective, in this case, it's to get the right bricks in the right holes. In the digital world, that might be learning which content produces the best outcome for our webinar sign-up goal, for example. Then the brain, or in our case, the machine learning platform, keeps taking more and more bricks, or in our case, data from the website, and then working out what or which data achieves our objectives and which doesn't. So you might find that certain types of content directly contribute to our webinar sign-up goal, for example, whereas other types have no impact or even a negative impact, such as bouncing off the site. And once our brain or machine learning model has done enough training to have a significant statistical probability that one action is more likely to achieve our objective than another, then it's able to tell us, or rather our website, what content to show the next user who has similar traits. So hopefully, as an analogy, that's beginning to make sense as to what exactly machine learning is and what it does. If we try and bring it back to technology, because that's what underpins most of this, we need to, as you've probably gathered by now, we need to feed it with data. The machine learning model, it processes and starts with data, and it ingests a huge amount of it. In terms of the amount of data you need, that depends on the complexity of the scenario you're trying to achieve. But generally, you will need a fair bit of data to pump into this system in order to get a statistical probability that you're going to get a successful outcome on the other end. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So the data is fed into the machine learning model. The model then trains itself based on the data it's receiving and which combinations is getting to the right success target you defined. So your success target might be that webinar sign up that I just mentioned. And once the machine's up and running, then there's a process of ongoing optimization against your target, some of which the model will continue to do naturally because it keeps processing more and more data, so it's always becoming more accurate as time goes by. But you will also want your data experts, which could be ratio, it could be a machine learning contractor, you know, however you work. They'll want to refine that model based on the performance of the content recommendations that's being spat out of the machine learning model. So really, as with anything related to testing and personalization, it needs love and attention to work hardest for you, which means you need to be treating it like a personalization and testing project. Before we press on into the detail of how we set up a machine learning project for the first time, which is hopefully the takeaway you'll get from this webinar, I just want to quickly run through 3 common examples of how content recommendations could work. This isn't exhaustive. This is really using Microsoft Azure's out-of-the-box content recommendations model. So that's something you can plug into from day one and start feeding it data. We're going to look at 2 of these examples in a minute, but if we have a look through the 3 I've got here, we've got frequently brought together. So this is the Amazon star recommendation. So we know that a content item, such as an article, is frequently viewed by users along with other content items in a single visit. What we can do then is identify that as high value content and serve recommendations to other users on the same journey. So this won't be a particularly new concept for you, but this is where machine learning plays a part. Item to item is more of a sort of content relationship model where we're looking at attributes of content such as star ratings or the category tagging or taxonomies, and then we're matching content up so that people who view one type of content will be served content of similar attributes. And then the third example is we've got user to item. And this is where we've got a single user where we're tracking everything they're doing. We're looking at the past profile of them, their history, and then we're recommending the next best content for them based on that. Essentially, what we're getting into is the creation of things like audience types here. So if we move into how do we get going with this? You're probably looking at this slide and thinking, yep. And you wouldn't be alone. We did a presentation on machine learning at a financial services event a few months ago. And we presented a more basic version of what I'm talking about today. And one of the questions we got from an attendee on the day was, we're still grappling with personalization. You know, this is way beyond our capability at the moment. We really want to get the basics done first. And for some people, that's right. For some people, machine learning is going to be a bit premature. You might not have the data ready. There might be a lack of skills internally. Or it might be time, so on, so on. However, on the flip side, machine learning, ironically, also helps to solve some of those blockers as well. So when we're talking about things like how do we manage this at scale, you know, this is where machine learning can help us to automate these processes. So we're not sitting there trying to set up rules on 200 different pages for 200 different scenarios, and you quickly get into the, you know, thousands and thousands of personalization rules that you've got to try and manage. So if we have a look at how that works in practice, let's take a law firm, Bodgett and Scarpa, a well-known law firm in London. We're looking at some of the content challenges or personalization challenges, management challenges and scale challenges that a typical law firm working on Sitecore or perhaps another CMS is having at the moment. So we're a legal firm with hundreds of thought leadership articles that loosely tagged with metadata. We've got no way of tracking which audience segments are engaging with our content, so we don't know which audience segments are behaving on what types of content. We've got no analytics or very little analytics, or if we have got analytics, we don't know how to manipulate it properly to understand which content's driving engagement. We've got no idea of the most valuable content or service to show the user next. So if they're looking at one type of content, do we really know, or do we really know ourselves from our data where we should be sending them? So what's the next best action for that user? Is it a sign up? Is it conversion? Is it more content? Is it sending them to a service page? That sort of journey of what we think, how we solve it, who we are, and then contact us. So it's trying to work out that journey. And then, the question I mentioned, which is that we've barely started with personalization. This is going to require a monumental effort to manage at scale. So that's some common challenges we're trying to solve by introducing machine learning into the marketing mix. So why don't we have a look at a typical basic scenario that Budget and Scarpa might want to solve as their first foray into machine learning. In Ratio, we use the term experiment or hypothesis. You might use, the words tests or even just project. We call it experiment hypothesis because what we're doing is we're trying to understand what works, what doesn't, and then turn those into more permanent features of our content marketing strategy or our communication strategy or whatever it might be. So this is a typical example. We want to know which of our content is performing best for our Brexit audience, bit of a topical reference for you there, in the UK, to drive them through to our highest value content or call to action based on what previous users have successfully converted on. I'll give you a couple of examples, one simple and one a little bit more complex, that machine learning can help to solve this issue. So starting point for everything is going to be data. So without data, we've got nothing to feed into our machine learning brain. And we need to understand what data we have. Where does it sit? If you're a Sitecore marketer, which I think most people on the webinar are, then the chances are you've got XDB turned on, which is the user data collection database. So that will be running away in the background. That will be collecting basic data about your users, such as number of visits, pages viewed, inbound traffic source, and so on. In order to make that data more useful, though, you want to also be configuring things like goals and events, for example, on form submissions or white paper downloads or webinar signups, so that you can start to collect meaningful information about valuable journeys, conversion points, traffic channels, and so on. And this stems from really what you've defined as being the success objective that we spoke about earlier for your project. So what is the objective? We want people to get in contact with us, for example. Then we just map it back and say, okay, what do we need to do? What's the valuable points in that journey? You might also want to consider enriching that XDB data with other data you hold about users in platforms such as CRM. So, for example, to take something we discussed the other day with one of our clients, you might want to classify a user in Sitecore as being a cold, warm, or hot lead, and then pass that information along with all the other data we hold about them in Sitecore into your machine learning brain, and then see how different sales lead types behave, because your cold prospect is probably going to behave slightly differently to a hot prospect. For example, the kind of information they're looking at that point in the journey. They're probably looking for more, some people will be looking for more trust information, some people will be looking for more product related, some people are looking for contact information, and so on. And then finally, you want to consider how you extract data from Sitecore and GA and other places in the first place, and then manipulate this to make sure that the data model you're creating is backed up by the right kind of data, but also that the impact can be measured on the other end of the process. So you want to be able to see, okay, the content recommendations, are they actually driving real value for us? How do we use Google Analytics to start to measure the success of the project, along with the data and measurement analytics we're collecting within Azure Machine Learning as well? It's important to note, and this is something we talk about in a lot of our content and communications and webinars, you're going to need an experienced data analyst who knows their way around platform and analytics, and that can make sure that your thinking and hypotheses are validated rather than just being guesses. So you need someone who doesn't just look at top performing content and bounce rates and dwell times and all that sort of stuff that you churn out every month as a report. You need someone who can look at audience segments, behaviors, next best actions, content engagement, and all those really rich insights that only an experienced data analyst can give you. As you get more advanced, you may also want to consider how you support more complex scenarios in machine learning. I'm not going to get too much into this today, but when you do get more complex and you're getting more towards the sort of AI level of machine learning, and you're going to be looking at hardcore data scientists, people with strong mathematical backgrounds, developers with strong mathematical backgrounds as well, potentially. So specialists who can help support the creation of more complex machine learning models. But let's not burden ourselves too much with that for now, because we're just looking at baby steps for the moment. We're looking to try and prove the value. So if we have a look at Sitecore data we're collecting at Budget and Scarpa, you can see down here we've got the data we're collecting in XDB, for example, at the moment. So location, company size, job title, industry, and a whole bunch of other stuff that we know about our users and we're storing already. And then we've got our content item data. So we're looking at how is our content tagged? You know, do they have content ratings that users have given them, industry, topics, regions, and maybe some other facets and attributes in there as well. And as you probably know, you may have seen this screen before, the Sitecore XDB. I've spoken about the collection of data. This is a known user, but it could also be an anonymous user. And it's showing all the data we've got on holding about that user. So you know, the goals they've triggered, number of times they've visited, audience pattern matches, and a whole bunch of other things. And again, we can enrich this with CRM data, and this can be pumped into our machine learning model. So we spoke before about objectives and targets. So that defines really what we want to try and do with our model. So what do we consider success to be? We can look at objectives really as being good or bad. We're really just focusing on good results today, but bad results can also help to train the model based on which journeys or interactions actually aren't delivering the results you want, and that could be as useful as the good results. But in this case, our good results could be, for example, completed a contact form, clicked on a staff contact bio. For a lot of professional services, that's where their contact information sits, you know, direct phone numbers and emails and so on. Viewed service page. Often we want to take people from thought leadership to service content. So, you know, again, what's the next best action? What do we consider success to be? And all that can be tracked in a platform such as Sitecore, and it can be spat out into our machine learning model. So if you have a look at one of these models then in a bit more detail. So for users who viewed our Brexit category of content that we're publishing on the site, we want to automatically show them the most popular content by rating to drive them to engage further or convert, depending on what our success criteria is. So the model we're looking at here is essentially matching the attributes of the content the user's looking at to the attributes of other content. We're plugging this data into the machine learning model so we can evaluate the data based on this, and then we're coming up with a best match. So I've tried to do a basic visual representation of how that works. I mean, this is just a basic cross diagram. We've got our categories along the horizontal axis. I've only got two here, as this is quite a simple model. So along the horizontal, we've got legal and Brexit. We might have, you know, other categories in here as well, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just using these as an example. Along the vertical axis is the content rating. So highest rated content and lowest rated content. And what the model is doing is looking for a best match. And in this case, you can see that the best match, the most valuable, is in the top right in that green dot that we've got there. So that's the content recommendation that the machine learning model is going to send back to Sitecore to say, okay, in the component on the page, you want to show content ID XYZ 123, whatever it might be, and that's going to be, you know, a call to action link or a related insights link or something like that. So that's quite a basic idea. You get the idea. This isn't a real world scenario. You probably wouldn't go this simple because it's quite narrow. If we have a look at maybe a frequently brought together recommendation instead, this is something where we might want to say, for users who viewed the same content, what other types of content are similar types of users also viewing? So if I've got a user who's coming onto the site, in this case it's me, I'm looking at Brexit content, I'm looking at politics content. We want to say, okay, so what's the next best type of content that Steve can see based on what previous users have done? And this information about Steve is sent to a machine learning model. A machine learning model is saying, aha, I can see actually we've got other similar users like my valuable colleague Mario, who've been looking at the same kind of content. And actually we've noticed that those kind of users are also looking at the EU white paper that we produced recently as well. So we can send that information back to Sitecore, and on Steve's visit, we can start showing him EU-related content. So all this is happening automatically in the background. You're not having to set these rules up manually. What we have is this is all being fed by the model and by the data that we're shunting into it. And then as your machine learning is telling us, it's telling Sitecore rather, what is the next best thing that the user can see based on data, not just supposition. again, a reasonably simple example, but it's a starting point, and that's what we're trying to get to today. So we're producing a lot of content, but you're not sure how users are navigating around and what's generating the most value for you. This is working off the provision of a fairly basic stream of data that's continually being processed, so the result is relevant and up to date as possible. So just very quickly, I'm going to have a look at Azure Machine Learning. Azure Machine Learning you may have heard of, so it's a cloud-based service. There's been talk of Sitecore Cortex, which claims to be a machine learning platform. You've probably heard about it. I think 9.1, there was a slightly more sophisticated release of something that didn't really exist before. To be brutally honest, I haven't really seen much in the way of documentation or examples for Sitecore Cortex to give me much of a steer into how well it really works or how it's set up. But really, due to the amount of data processing involved and the ability to plug Sitecore quite easily into another machine learning engine, ourselves at Ratio, we tend to advocate the use of best-of-breed technologies to ensure the most robust data processing capability, and also the ability to scale as well. So with Azure's machine learning service, specifically, it's a mature platform. It's got easy connectivity to data sources, which of course enables that movement of data I spoke about earlier to support our project. Obviously, it's well known, it's enterprise, it's got live applications and examples in multiple different industries of all scales. So really what you're getting is the confidence in your investment. Sitecore does a lot of things averagely. A lot of things aren't particularly well documented. And what we personally like about Azure is that the scale is almost unlimited. When it comes to the amount of data that potentially needs to be crunched as you get larger and larger and larger, you're going to need a cloud service that you can scale up to meet your demands. Someone also asked me recently, can you run machine learning on-premise? So getting away from clouds for whatever reason on-premise, if you need to have that. I mean, the answer is there are solutions out there that claim to offer this, but for most businesses, this will be time and cost prohibitive, really, as well as skills prohibitive. So unless there's a very good reason, stick to cloud. Don't worry about on-prem. Don't even talk about it. So creating a model of data. Just very quickly, I want to show you the diagram. So how does it work really as a flow? So we've got our data that we're collecting in Sitecore or from CRM on the left-hand side that we spoke about earlier. We're then sending that information via item service APIs in the case of our content attributes, or XConnect in the case of our user attributes. That's been fed into the machine learning model, and then Azure Machine Learning is splitting those recommendations back to us. So if you like, that's the Janet and John simple diagram that shows you how this all fits together. I'm just going to give you a quick glimpse under the hood as well into the Azure Machine Learning model configuration. It's unlikely, in fact, it's extremely unlikely, as a marketer you'll ever even look at this. This will be something that your data and technical team will be setting up based on the requirements you give them. But I want to show you just the actual model that does all this data processing. This is a screenshot. There's a whole bunch of other things that sit around this screenshot. At a base level, it's a bit like creating a drag and drop flow diagram, but there's a huge amount of attributes and configuration options, and this can get quite complex quite quickly. The first time we played around with machine learning, it's obvious immediately you need support and someone who actually knows what they're doing. So you won't ever see this, but this is essentially the kind of the flow, if you like, the visual representation of what's happening in that model in the backgrounds. Once you've got your model set up, this is the Azure Machine Learning taskbar, by the way. You want to deploy it, so you want to make it ready. So you need to put your model live, and this is just a process of really just deploying it as a web service, and this allows Sitecore or your CMS to then start talking to it. So data that can then start passing between the two platforms, and your content recommendations will then start coming back onto site into the components that you've built to accommodate for this. So in this case, it's read our latest update on Brexit content, sign up for our webinar. So again, this is being fed by the model that we just created. I'm just in the last couple of slides, so I'm going to wrap up a little bit as to why use Sitecore and Azure Machine Learning. And I've just realized I've misspelled the title, so I'll correct that later anyway. So Sitecore already collects a huge amount of data, as you know, we've been through that earlier in the webinar, and can ingest data from other sources, such as CRM, to enrich user profiles, which can be used in the machine learning model. So we've already got this data here, Sitecore's collecting it, why not use it? It's there already. Sitecore has rich data points, so it's got engagement value goals, it's got those audience profiling. So once those are all configured and set up, we can make the recommendations even more accurate by feeding even more relevant data into the Azure Machine Learning model. And finally, something like Sitecore, a platform like Sitecore, built to best practice, has a very component-based design, or should have a very component-based design. So what that gives you as a marketer or a content editor is the ability to choose where recommendations are pushed back in. So you'll have components that are built by your developers to ingest content from Azure's machine learning model. So again, you don't need to worry about how it works. Developers will take care of that, but you just need to define whereabouts on the site you want these content recommendations to happen. And then really it comes down to this. We've got a single data source there, a very rich data source with an API that allows us to bang information in and out of it very easily with platforms such as Azure. In terms of what you'll need, this isn't a comprehensive list because it really depends on the maturity, where you are with things, and what it is you're trying to achieve. You'll need Sitecore XDB or some other web collection, data collection platform. You might want to look at something like Telium as well. So Telium has a product called Audience Stream, so we can start to badge users based on the kind of content, and then we can use that to potentially drive recommendations. So if you haven't got XDB turned on, there may be other ways of doing this. Data collection points configured, so goals, audience types, content categorization, and so on. The objectives set, so setting the objectives for your first machine learning project, what it is we consider success to be. A data expert or data scientist, I spoke about this earlier, I won't cover it again. A machine learning subscription to a service such as Azure Machine Learning. And then as you get more advanced, or even probably for your earlier steps, you're going to want to have a machine learning specialist, maybe a Python developer at some point, to do the config and setup of your first machine learning model. So I'm just going to recap, and then we'll have time for a few questions if people want to ask any. So understand the data, what it is you're collecting, defining your success and failure goals, preparing the data schema, so what data we want to extract to put into our model, and where do we want Sitecore components on our site to ingest content back from Azure. Connecting your data via API, so that's going to be technical work to extract the data from Sitecore and put it into the right place. Creating the model in machine learning, and that's where you're going to need some support from people who know what they're doing within machine learning. Deploying a web service and making sure that the model is ready to start ingesting and pushing out content. Ingesting recommendations back into Sitecore components, again, that technical setup of the components on your site. And then measuring and optimizing the model. So how do we continually refine and make sure it's performing as hard as it can to us, and then iterating it and rolling out further tests and experiments. And that is about 23 minutes, so we've just got time for a few questions. So we've got a question here. So how much data do you need to properly train the machine learning model? So the answer to that is really it depends. So I spoke earlier about statistical significance. So you'll need enough data in order to produce a valid result, and that depends on the amount of data, the amount of attributes, the amount of facets of information. Obviously, if you're only putting 5 lines of data into your model, you're not going to get a statistically significant result. So it depends very much on how much data and what it is you're trying to do. Yeah, we had a question. Would we be able to see the data that machine learning is collecting, i.e., readers interested in Brexit tend to also be interested in tax. So yes, there is analytics within Azure Machine Learning, so a lot of this data can be pulled out, and again, you need probably a specialist to get that data for you. But yeah, the data is all there, so everything the model is learning is available for us to extract and see. I've got another question here. How much does Azure Machine Learning cost? There is a pricing calculator. It's based on computing power, but also the number of, they call it predictions, I think. So, you know, if you have 3,000 predictions, there is a price per prediction. So if you're running this on one page on your site, you might send 3,000 predictions through, and I think that might cost, I can't remember off the top of my head, I have to look at the pricing calculator. But if you search for it online, the pricing's there and you can work it out. I've got one final question here. How long does it take to set up a simple recommendation scenario like the ones you described? I guess if it's your first project, you might be looking at maybe a month end to end to get it set up, because there is a learning curve obviously involved in this. I would say also though, it depends on the complexity and what it is you're trying to do, because there may be technical integration work you need to do. You may need to go through the process of setting up goals and things within Sitecore. So there may be stuff outside just of the pure machine learning tasks that you have to get set up as a preparation before you can really get going with this. And it's really how long's a piece of string. So the task list that I went through on that last slide is what you should be looking at really. So which of this have you got at the moment? Do you have your data in place? Have you got your goals in place? Have you got the ability to extract data from Sitecore? Have your components been built to support it? Do you have data analysts in place? That sort of stuff. So it depends a lot on that. So it does depend, but you can see the steps here, and then you can start to either speak to us or another specialist to talk about exactly how much and how long this would take. And I think that is all the questions we have. So I'm going to leave it there. My email address is on the slide on the screen in front of you. If you have any more questions, feel free to email me. I think probably most of you have got a contact detail for someone in Ratio anyway. So feel free to send any questions. We'll answer what we can. And there'll be a recording of this and also a blog post going up in the near future as well. So if you want access to those, the blog will be coming out shortly, and let us know if you want a copy of the recording. So thank you very much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we will no doubt speak to you soon.